Hi there everyone, I'm JP. It's January 27th, Tuesday, 2015, and yeah, it's been a few days, and I've made a lot of progress, and I thought I'd show it off in this video. So here's the big thing. When I hit the space bar, this panel pops up, and it allows you to pick characters and colors, which is super exciting. And then we can paint them in the view. So that's really cool. At this point, you might have noticed that these little flickering things are appearing. I really need to fix that next. Like, it's now become one of the most obnoxious visual glitches. So yeah, I'll definitely take care of that. So yeah, you can change all these different things, and in addition to this, I've also got the beginnings of buttons, like buttons that you can click in this UI. Like here, I've got, it doesn't actually do what it's supposed to at the moment, but I've got a plus and minus button for changing the character set scale, because I've got it scaled up all big here, which might be good for some screen resolutions and not for others, so, you know, just giving a control to do that. And then what this is going to turn into, the tools panel here, the tools tab, is it's going to, instead of the character set and palette, it's going to show tool settings, like your paintbrush. Does it change colors or just characters? What size is it? And any other brush settings like that. And I've shown that in a previous mock-up, so you can refer to that if you're curious. Another major thing that I did here was I did some work on both. Let me open up a few things here. So I did some work on multi-document support. So we've got multiple pieces of art that we've got open here, and we're editing them. And you can hit Control Tab, I believe, just because I figured it's kind of like in a web browser, you know, when you can actually switch tab. That's a keyboard shortcut for switching tabs. I think obviously having a menu-based way to do that as well. But yeah, and when you switch, I got a little fancy, and it lerps them into and out of, like, it draws the grid around the active art that you're editing. But then, yeah, and, you know, I can sample from one piece of artwork and then draw owl eyeballs. Actually, did that work correctly? It should have. Interesting. Anyway, the other thing that might not be obvious from this tiny little piece of test art is that this is an alternate character set. This is the Atari 8-bit computer Playscii, as it's called, character set, which looks kind of similar to Commodore 64, but it's also a little different. And I can paint with that, and the character, the character color pop-up shows that character set and color palette. And as you can see here, because the Atari palette is much bigger, it's got like 256 colors in it, it runs off the side, and so that's another thing I'm going to fix very soon here. And yeah, get it all kind of stacked in there nicely. So yeah, I think those are two of the big things. What else? Yeah, yeah, just switching around to multiple things, and you really can. It's starting to be like, it would be somewhat annoying to create a piece of artwork in this right now, but you know, you can do some of the basics that were there in Playscii, and that's pretty cool. And pretty soon you'll be able to do a lot more. Yeah, so I think one big thing that's missing right now, and you can see it on my to-do list here behind here, is undo support. Because being able to undo is pretty important in an art tool. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything interesting in the code department. I had kind of an architectural decision to make about UI, or just a design, you know, a code design sort of thing. Because right now there's two different things that the UI uses to determine if you're hovering over something. It uses one bit of code here in the main, like, singleton UI class here to determine if an element is being hovered, and an element here means something like this pop-up, this entire shape here, or the status bar. Whereas individual UI elements can have multiple buttons, and the data for those looks kind of like this. This is the master class, so it's got, like, every single default that a button could have, and a more practical one, like I can define these buttons here with only a little bit of with only a property sheet, and then there's some stuff where like if they're variable screen location dependent or something, then you got to do a little bit to keep up with where they're at for that. But anyway, I considered, and so the UI is doing that one thing where it gets the mouse position and then is like, are you hovering over the pop-up right now, or what are you doing here? And then there's a somewhat similar looking bit of code in UI element, which is the code that runs for each and every UI element. Look at me, I've just messed up this lovely little piece of artwork here. I drew all over it. And yeah, it does a very similar thing because it just does a bounds check inside of each of these things, and it's kind of similar math. I think one difference though is that it's checking in tile character space, because this element here is just a grid of tiles, and then it has this special element that's being drawn in the source art character set over it. But for the most part, this is just another piece of art with the kind of narrow handcrafted UI character set. And yeah, I left a comment here because I like to document for myself in the future and other people who might maybe look at this code. It is very similar, but I've worked in other code bases, and I'm not going to name names here, where UI element is this magical nestable thing, where you can have UI elements nesting within UI elements, and in those systems, that's frequently how you implement buttons. Because it is kind of elegant to be able to say, okay, here's a UI element, this window here is a UI element, but then it's got child UI elements, and it kind of has to iterate through all of those, and then if it detects that something is being hovered over, then it passes that back up the stack. And it might have just been the implementations of that concept that I've dealt with in the past, but I found it to be pretty cumbersome or kind of confusing because it creates, any given piece of code that you're looking at, there's a lot more pieces of code besides that are doing things that you got to worry about when you're thinking about UI state. So I kind of went with just, there's just UI elements, and they can have plenty of buttons, and each of those buttons can have a let's see here, whoops. The pop-up is easily the most complicated one I've constructed so far, and yeah, this is something where I might generalize this a little more beyond the pop-up UI here. But I have a table, I have a Python dictionary that maps button class names into these string names, which then get turned into member variables for the pop-up thing, so that it can refer to something by name. It's like when the UI pop-up is thinking about, when it's drawing all of its stuff down here, it's like, oh yeah, I want to be able to change my my care color tab button. It's kind of a mouthful. It gives that a name based on what's in that dictionary, and then it actually kind of auto-generates the name of the callback function. And I did that partly I don't think this was foolish, because I just wanted to be able to define what the UI elements, what the buttons were, kind of centrally. And what this would have looked like if I had not done it like this would have been a much longer bit of much more repetitive boilerplate sort of code, where it's like, okay, if I want to add a new thing, each of those is going to have 4 or 5 or 6 in the future probably lines of code just to kind of instantiate it and do all of the things that a button needs to do. Whereas this way, I just, I have this one function that kind of loops through and does everything once for each entry in this dictionary. So in the future, I can add and I'm almost certainly going to add a lot of other buttons to this thing. And, that will just be adding this and then adding the specific, and then writing the callback, which really is the unique logic, for handling what the button actually does. So, getting down to the business logic and not doing this boilerplate to just kind of get UI elements existing, that feels like a win to me. One thing that's ahead of me here is that obviously, the tools panel, when I click on it here, it should be showing that, and it's not. So I want to make the tools tab here, and I'm not actually sure how to handle tabs. That's another kind of UI nesting decision there, right? Because, the pop-up at that point just really kind of becomes a fairly thin container for these tabs, because the tabs, like this, everything that you see here except for the tab headings is, I don't know why the hover color keeps changing like that. Something's broken. Anyway, yeah, so like handling the handling how to do the separate tabs and clear off the main part of the pop-up. I'm still going to resist the make things nested, just because, again, I think that's a headache, and the stuff that I'm doing UI-wise is never going to get so many levels deep complicated, I don't think, that it will necessitate that. I could go back on that decision fairly painlessly. It was mainly today that I was working on this stuff. So yeah, I think that's about all I've got to show for now. But yeah, I'm kind of somebody that I showed a build to actually created the very first piece of artwork with Playscii. They just kind of took a screenshot off the application itself, which was quite a thrill to see. And I've been holding off on making a new piece of artwork myself, just because it's kind of a pain, and I want to be getting used to the actual user experience of this program rather than cutting corners. But yeah, I think it will be pretty soon. I want to get undo support in there and working. Yeah, and then maybe I'll try my hand at it. Maybe I'll post a piece of art on Twitter or something. So anyway, hopefully that is coming very soon. And thank you so much for watching. And thank you, as always, to my wonderful Patreon supporters for helping make it possible for me to do this work. And yeah, I think that's about all I've got now. So thank you, and good night.